Somebody cue the music. Hey guys, thank you for joining me. Welcome back to episode 5 of the NAC Corner. I am Paul Jones, your NAC chair, if you're joining me here for just the first time. So welcome if you are. And I just have to say before we get started, wow, thank you guys. There have been a ton of comments on my YouTube channel since we talked last time and started a conversation about leadership. If you remember, we started with this guy right here. And if you missed that episode, you want to go back to episode 4 because you really need to understand what this here fellow has to do with leadership. I haven't named him yet. Maybe we should do that as part of this whole process. Just like the turtle, if you put people in the right situation, they excel and they perform incredibly. Conversely, if you have the wrong person in the wrong situation, they don't. And I asked you guys, what it was like for you to have those conversations with your teams. And we talked about the fact that for most leaders, fear is the thing that gets in the way of making the decisions necessary to get this guy where he belongs. So your question of the week last time was, what is your biggest fear as a leader? So the theme in all of the comments had to do with your teams. Those of you as a leader, making sure that your teams felt supported and they had all the resources that they needed. And those of you who are on teams, hoping that you're doing a good job, but maybe not being sure that you're not doing a good job. And it reminded me of something that conversation that I had, or actually I didn't have it, I was listening to it last year. So I was at a meeting here locally with a group of business owners. And folks were sitting around the dinner table talking about their businesses, as you do. And there was one business owner that was really just going to town telling a story. He was talking about how he had just recently fired his entire team. And I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds like a crisis. And what was interesting to me is that everybody around him was applauding him, saying how awesome that was, how daring that was, and thought it was fantastic. And the only thing I could think was, well, aren't you the one that hired him in the first place? And don't get me wrong, I don't work in his business, and maybe those folks needed to go. It's quite possible. Maybe there was no place for this guy to swim and be his best, because that does happen sometimes. But much more often than that, as leaders, we really don't know what to do with our teams. We sort of hire people, we put them in jobs, we think, just bloop, add a little bit of water, poof, you have exactly what you need. And when it doesn't work out, you say, come on, do your job, and they don't, and so we kick them out the door. And then we wonder why in this country we struggle with people being loyal to their employers. Well, maybe it has something to do with employers not being loyal to them. And that's the conversation I want to have with you guys. How do you get your people all rowing in the same direction? Because quite honestly, that's the only thing we have that separates us from all the other competition that's out there. If you think about First Light and who we are and our culture of care, it's all about taking care of our employees and putting people first. And it's really easy to forget that in the doing of the thing every day. So you almost have to have a model. I don't think you almost do. I think you do have to have a model that you talk about, that's in front of you, that you talk about with your team to really keep you on course. So that you don't end up being a dysfunctional family before it's all over with. So what does that look like? And I want to take the next 5 episodes and we're actually going to unpack this. This is something that I found in in the early 2000s. If you watch the NAC Corner videos, my very first one, I talked about my very first leadership experience. I'm not going to go back into that in detail today, but let's suffice it to say, I suck.
You suck!
Yes. So, what did I need to do? Well, I needed to learn how to engage with my team. And that's when I found and fell in love with a man named Patrick Lencioni. He had come to Louisville at the time to do presentations talking about leadership. And he had written a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And his belief is that, just like I said a moment ago, that the big difference between companies that are successful and the ones that don't, and you can really even say this about families, the ones that are able to get everybody rowing in the same direction, accomplishing the mission together, will far outpace the competition in any industry, any marketplace, when you compare them against those that don't. But what ends up happening is there are these very natural dysfunctions that we fall into because we're human. We don't set out to do this. And they're interdependent with one another. And so in Pat's model, he's laid these out in a pyramid, and it starts at the bottom and works its way up. And each one is foundational to the one before it. So if you're not focused well and not doing well in one category, it's going to affect the next and the next and the next. And so I'm going to put up on the screen what this looks like so you guys can see it. So it starts with, so you can see there's 5 categories there: trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. And we're really going to take, like I said, the next 5 weeks to unpack this. And I really want you guys to continue to interact in the comments like you've been doing. It's been awesome. So we can have a conversation about this stuff. But the very first one, not surprisingly, comes down to trust. So what do we mean when we talk about trust? Well, a lot of companies have core values. Trust is one of First Light's core values, as a matter of fact. It's not unusual to walk into any boardroom in the United States in business and see one of those successory posters, up on the wall that says, "We believe in trust." Well, when you think about that as a core value, it's not that, we don't believe in trust. And when we think about trust, we think about people usually that tell the truth versus the ones that don't. But not being a liar is a pretty low bar when it comes to an organization's health. If that's kind of where you're setting things, there's probably a little more you need to aspire to than we hire people that tell the truth. Great. That's more like permission to play. Yes, we want everybody here to tell the truth. Well, that's not what we mean when we talk about trust in this context. What we're talking about when we talk about trust in the context of a team is that you believe that those around you and those you work with genuinely have your best interests at heart. So much so that you're willing to be vulnerable with them. You don't have to hide who you are. You don't have to hide what you think. You trust that they are looking out for your good, and they trust that you are looking out for their good. So you can have real, open, honest conversations with one another. And that is 100% foundational. I'm going to put that back up on the screen so you can see kind of how that works together. Trust is one of those things that lies at the heart of a functioning, cohesive team. And without trust, teamwork is almost impossible. So like I was saying, trust is one of those words that gets misused a lot. But it all sounds to some people, when I start talking about vulnerability in business and vulnerability in working with your team, it sounds kind of soft. There goes Paul again. He's a social worker. He's been a therapist, bleeding heart. Well, believe it or not, I'm not a bleeding heart. And these things are very tangible and very real. So achieving vulnerability-based trust, and I'm going to put this back up on the screen again for you to look at, is difficult because in the course of career advancement and education, most successful people learn to be competitive with their peers, and we protect our reputations. And so when you're in a good team, you don't really have to do those things. You can let your guard down and be real with one another. So I guess my question for you this week is, how do you feel like you're doing in this area? There's more we can unpack here, and I would love to do that in the comments. But when you think about your levels of vulnerability with your team, for example, does everybody on your team, for you as a leader, know what your weak spots are? Things that you don't do well? Do they have permission to raise their hand in a meeting or speak up and say, you know what, I think you're wrong, and here's why I think you're wrong? Or are they scared to do that because, we've all had that experience of the meeting after the meeting, right? We all get in a meeting and we sort of nod our heads, and then when the meeting's over with, we all get around the water cooler and talk about the real stuff. What is the climate like where you work? Can people raise their hands, tell you the truth without you being defensive? And can you do that with others? Does everybody openly and honestly talk about what they do well, what they don't do well? And are they comfortable with both of those things? The more trust you have in your team that the other people around you really have your back and are looking out for the good in you rather than these taboo subjects that we can't talk about, that is foundational to the success of your business and the success of your team. So I'm going to put this model up one more time so you can see it. When we're talking about these things as dysfunctions, the first one is the absence of trust. And it comes from the fear of being vulnerable with team members prevents the building of trust within the team. And that is the place that we really need to start when we think about these things. So that's where we want to go for the next 5 episodes. We're going to be talking about these things together. And here's the question that I want you to think about this week. Are there things that your team is afraid to talk to you about, and why? So think about that. Are there things as a leader that your team is afraid to talk to you about, and why? If you don't know and you have weekly team meetings with your staff, I hope you do, maybe that's a good question to ask them. Hey guys, is there anything going on around here that I should know that you're scared to tell me, and why would that be? If you want to hear my vulnerable story of how I went back there, go back to episode 1, where again, I sucked as a leader.
You suck!
And I unpacked that for you there and what my experience has been like. I started focusing on this as a leader, so this came out in 2002, 17 years ago? And I have to work at it every single day here, because that's why Pat calls this 5 dysfunctions. Left to our own devices, we sort of swerve this way because we're human. So we have to really focus on these things. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go into the comments just like you did last time, and I want you to answer the question, are there things that your team is afraid to talk to you about, and why? If you do go into the comments, I'm keeping track of everybody's name that's out there. I'm trying to engage as much as I can with you guys to keep the conversation going. When we get to the end of this series, there's going to be a phenomenal prize related to everything we're talking about here. It's going to be drawn from one of the folks that is chosen to comment and be part of the conversation. So there's been some great stuff said out there by owners all across the country, and I don't want you to miss being part of that conversation. So thank you again for joining me with episode 5 of the NAC Corner. I'm going to put this model up one more time for you to see before we go. And I'm going to put a link to the PDF to that over in the show notes for you to check out. And your question, again, for the week is, are there things that your team is afraid to talk to you about, and why? I'd love to hear what you think about it. Hey, happy Friday, everybody. It is cold here in Virginia. That's why I got my turtleneck on today, dropped down to 20 degrees. I hope you are warm, safe, and happy where you are. Continue struggling and reaching to be the leader that you wish you had when you were coming up in your career. And I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. Oh, which reminds me, today is November 15th, and there's not going to be an episode of NAC Corner the week of Thanksgiving because there's no episode of First Look that week. So I won't see you guys until December 6th. So you've got a few weeks to think about this and chew on it. So until then, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy your family, be safe, and be very grateful for the opportunity that you have to make a difference. I know I am every day, and I'm very thankful to be part of this First Light family and thankful to be on this journey with you guys. So thanks again for joining me. Happy Thanksgiving, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Hey, so you're probably looking for a screaming goat right about now. Not today, he's got the day off. It's hard to find good goats these days. See ya.